The Civil War, Part 1. The Civil War captivates the imaginations of 21st century Americans more than any other event in our history. Take Civil War tourist sites, for example, that draw millions of visitors every year. Places like Gettysburg. Every year, between 1 and 2 million people visit Gettysburg. The peak year, 2002, 1.8 million people visited Gettysburg. There are travel companies that offer entire Civil War package vacations. You can book a cruise on a 19th century steamboat down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers and stop only at Civil War sites along the way. Twice I have taught my Civil War class as a travel study class, and during spring break we took a trip through Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and visited all sorts of Civil War sites, and it wasn't just battlefields. It was things like Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., where President Lincoln was shot, assassinated, Robert E. Lee's house, the White House of the Confederacy in Richmond, and so on. Another way you see the fascination of the Civil War today is the movement to preserve Civil War sites. The best example comes from the 1990s, when the Walt Disney Company tried to build a Disney theme park near Manassas, Virginia, the site of 2 Civil War battles. The Disney theme park would have destroyed parts of the original battlefields. Well, a tremendous grassroots movement sprang up and forced Disney to abandon the whole idea. In the 1990s, this became known as the Third Battle of Manassas, the first 2 battles of Manassas being Civil War battles. It's like Mickey Mouse was threatening our precious Civil War heritage. And, amazingly, Americans chose the Civil War over Mickey Mouse. The Civil War defeated Disney. There's not too much that can defeat the Disney Company in this day and age, but the Civil War did. Here's a button from that particular campaign against Disney. Don't let Disney slip Virginia a Mickey. Then there's the reenactors. There's over 50,000 people who do this. Men and women, as there were men and women Civil War soldiers, who dress in authentic replica Civil War uniforms and arm themselves with authentic replica Civil War firearms, and they go out and they reenact all the battles every year. And they provide the extras for the films, the Hollywood films, like Gettysburg, Glory, Gods and Generals, or Spielberg's Lincoln. Several years ago, at the reenactment of the Battle of Gettysburg, one of the reenactors got a little carried away, started firing real bullets out of his rifle during the reenactment, wounded an enemy reenactor, and was arrested after the reenactment was over. So some of these people, they're a little nuts. Then we have the memorabilia collectors. There's over 200,000 people who collect Civil War stuff. And it's not cheap. Go to an antique show sometime and look at the prices for Civil War weaponry, for example. $6,000 for a Civil War Colt revolver. Or here's an extreme example. Here is a 1-page letter written and signed by President Abraham Lincoln on White House stationery. This letter sold at auction for $5 million. The bottom line, today the Civil War is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I think it begs the question, why? Why is the Civil War still so fascinating to Americans. Why do we care so much about this war that was fought over 150 years ago? Well, I think there's several reasons why the war is still so fascinating today. The first reason would have to be just the sheer magnitude of the war. It's so hard for us today to wrap our heads around how big this war actually was. But let's think about it this way. How many of you have seen the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C.? A wall of names that just goes on and on and on. The names of all the dead who died in Vietnam. It's a very moving memorial. And people leave flowers near the names of loved ones, or they'll take a piece of paper and a crayon and make a rubbing of the name to take home. If we had a Civil War memorial that was designed the same way as the Vietnam War memorial, it would have to be 13 times bigger. Because 13 times as many Americans died in the Civil War as died in Vietnam. 750,000 Americans died in the Civil War. That's more Americans died in the Civil War than in all other American wars combined. 750,000 dead out of a population then that was 1/10 our population today in the U.S. If we fought a war today where we lost proportionally the same amount of people, we'd lose 7.5 million people. Now, if you look just at the South, the numbers are even more frightening. Nearly 1 out of 4 Southern white men died during the Civil War. In one single day, at the Battle of Antietam, September 17, 1862, in Maryland, in one single day, 6,500 Americans were killed. The Battle of Antietam is the single bloodiest day in American history, September 17, 1862. When 9/11 happened, September 11, 2001, there were some uninformed people in the media who were saying this is the bloodiest day in American history. But it wasn't even close. We lost under 3,000 people on 9/11. We lost 6,500 in one day at Antietam during the Civil War. If you take 9/11 and add all the deaths in Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, it's still less than died in one day at the Battle of Antietam. Well, why such high casualties? First of all, you have to add up both sides. They were all Americans, whether it's North or South, Union or Confederate. Another reason for the high casualties in the Civil War is that this was a war where the technology outran the tactics. That is, the generals used old-fashioned battlefield tactics with modern weaponry. The armies waged old-fashioned frontal assaults against entrenched troops fighting with a new and deadly weapon, the rifle. A frontal assault is where one army will charge across an open field against the defending army, and the defenders are often in a trench. Frontal assaults almost always failed in the Civil War, with devastating casualties. But the generals would not learn the lesson and kept waging them. And the reason is because when the Civil War generals went to college at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, when they were taught the art of war at West Point, they were taught to wage frontal assaults, because frontal assaults worked. But that was before the invention of the rifle. Now, at the time of the Civil War, the soldiers are armed with rifles, and frontal assaults will fail with heavy, heavy casualties. You know, the Civil War generals, they were taught to wage frontal assaults. Frontal assaults worked in the Mexican War, the previous war, but that was before the invention of the rifle. Frontal assaults don't work anymore. Another reason the war is so fascinating today, it wasn't just a civil war, it was also a brothers' war. Not only was the nation torn apart, but so many American families were torn apart. There were so many American families where one son or brother fought for the North, and another son or brother fought for the South, and sometimes they fought against each other on the very same battlefields. Maybe the best example of the Brothers' War theme would be the first family of the United States, the Lincoln family. President Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. Where was she from? She was from Kentucky, a southern slave state. Mary Todd Lincoln had 7 brothers or brothers-in-law who fought for the South. And here she was First Lady for the North. Her whole family's fighting for the South. A lot of Northerners didn't like Mary Todd Lincoln because she was a Southerner. And when the war started to go bad for the North, many Northerners started to blame her. Why are we losing this war anyway? It must be because the First Lady is a Southern spy in the White House. These rumors got so bad that at one point President Abraham Lincoln had to appear before a congressional investigating committee as a character witness to testify that his wife was not a Confederate Southern spy. Here's Mary Todd Lincoln's sister, Emily Todd Helm. She was married to a Confederate officer. He was killed during the war. Mary Todd Lincoln then invited her widowed sister to the White House so that she could comfort her. Okay, now we have the enemy living in the White House. We have a Confederate widow living in the White House. So you could see where these rumors about Mary Todd Lincoln being a Southern spy came from. And so it's a brothers' war right up to the first family, and things get really complicated in a civil war. The Civil War was a brothers' war not only literally, but also metaphorically. Other groups besides families were also torn apart by the war. Take the U.S. Army, for example. The U.S. Army is a brotherhood or fraternity torn apart by the war. The opposing generals, North and South, they all knew each other. They had attended college at West Point together. They had fought side by side in the previous war, the Mexican War. They were best friends, and they were best men at each other's weddings. And then they divide North-South and fight against each other. The man on the right here is James Longstreet. He was one of the South's greatest generals. Before the war, he was the best man at the wedding of the man on the left. And that, of course, is Ulysses Grant, the North's greatest general. And so this brothers' war dimension adds to the tragedy, adds to the drama. It's another one of the reasons this war is so fascinating today.